The life of Elijah. Elijah is a very colorful character in the Scriptures, a remarkable prophet in our understanding. I'm going to start out with a reading which will not appear on the wall. 1 Kings chapter 16, 28 through 34. Background to the beginning of the account of the life of Elijah. So Omri slept with his fathers and was buried in Samaria. And Ahab his son became king in his place. Now Ahab, the son of Omri, became king over Israel in the 38th year of Asa, king of Judah. And Ahab, the son of Omri, reigned over Israel in Samaria 22 years. Ahab, the son of Omri, did evil in the sight of the Lord, more than all who were before him. It came about as though it had been a trivial thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat. Jeroboam was the first king of the northern 10 tribes in the divided kingdom. But he married Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians, and went to serve Baal and worshipped him. So he erected an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he built in Samaria. Ahab also made the Asherah. Asherah were pillars of idols. Thus Ahab did more to provoke the Lord God of Israel than all the kings of Israel who were before him. In his days, Hiel the Bethelite built Jericho. He laid its foundations with the loss of Abiram, his firstborn, and set up its gates with the loss of his youngest son, Segub, according to the word of the Lord, which he spoke by Joshua, the son of Nun. You remember there was a curse when Jericho was defeated, that the person who would rebuild it would have losses, and this records the fact those losses actually came. And then that brings us to 1 Kings 17, verse 1. Now Elijah the Tishbite, who was of the settlers of Gilead, said to Ahab, "As the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, before whom I stand, surely there shall be neither dew nor rain these years except by my word." Elijah was one of the greatest prophets of all time. There is a statement concerning John the Baptist, which says, "Truly I say to you, among those born of women there has not arisen anyone greater than John the Baptist. Yet the one who is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he." You remember John the Baptist, and we'll see this as we go along, was the one who would be Elijah if they would accept it. Elijah was remembered quite a bit. That's not what I wanted. Isn't that interesting? In the days of the New Testament, in Jesus' day. For example, in Malachi 4, 5, and 6 is the prophecy, which will be recited in the New Testament. "Behold, I'm going to send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and terrible day of the Lord. He will restore the hearts of the fathers to their children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers, so that I will not come and smite the land with a curse." So Elijah is being remembered at the very end of the Old Testament. I'm going to send him back, which is a very remarkable thing. He's the only one of the Old Testament prophets of which something like this is said. And then in Matthew chapter 11, 13, "For all the prophets and the law prophesied until John, and if you are willing to accept it, John himself is Elijah, who was to come." Luke records for us in 1:17, It is he who will go as a forerunner before him in the spirit and power of Elijah, to turn the hearts of the fathers back to the children, and the disobedient to the attitude of the righteous, so as to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. Talking about John the Baptist, but referring back to Elijah in a most remarkable way. John tells us in chapter 1, verse 19, this is the testimony of John. When the Jews sent to him, now John the author is telling us about John the Baptist. When the Jews sent to him priests and Levites from Jerusalem to ask him, who are you? And he confessed and did not deny, but confessed, I am not the Christ. They asked him, what then? Are you Elijah? And he said, I am not. Are you the prophet? And he answered, no. So the people in Christ's day knew that there was this promise of Elijah coming back before the great and terrible day of the Lord. And John the Baptist, they looked at and said, are you Elijah? He says, no, I'm not Elijah. So he was coming in the spirit and power of Elijah. He could be Elijah if they'd accept him, but he was not Elijah, and he did not claim to be Elijah. In Matthew chapter 27, verse 47, and some of those who were standing there, when they heard it, began saying, this man is calling for Elijah, saying of Christ on the cross. They said, he's calling for Elijah. Immediately one of them ran, and taking a sponge, he filled it with sour wine and put it on a reed and gave him to drink. But the rest of them said, let us see whether Elijah will come to save him. They had an idea of Elijah coming back, and even when Jesus was on the cross, they were still thinking about the possibility of Elijah coming back. Elijah's example, as we look at his whole life, speaks to those who feel alone in their work. Sometimes Christian work gets lonely. Sometimes you feel like you're all alone, and Elijah felt like he was all alone. So we can be comforted by the fact that there have been others that have had this feeling. It speaks to those who serve in a hard place. Elijah served in a very hard place, and we'll look at that a little bit more in a little bit. Speaks to those who feel powerless to influence a people who have departed from God. They say we live in a post-Christian era, and you can't give the gospel the same way today as you could in an earlier time. In an earlier time, most everybody understood something about Christ and Christianity and God. Today you have to start out like you're dealing with pagans, because so many people don't know a thing about him. It doesn't take more than a generation for people to forget God. Elijah's example speaks to those who serve long with meager results. Elijah didn't see a lot of results from what he did. He saw some spectacular results, but not great masses. And Elijah's example speaks to those who have failed. Elijah came to a point in his life where he just wanted to run away and hide. Things were so bad. And we go through circumstances like this in our lives, and his life and his example can be an example and encouragement for us. So we're going to look at 7 ways that Elijah impresses us. This is by way of introduction to a study we'll have for a few weeks on various events in the life of Elijah. 7 ways Elijah impresses us. First of all, he was just like us. James 5:17 says, Elijah was a man with a nature like ours. Sometimes we think of the prophets as just really spectacular people. It's because they were so special. It was because they were so powerful. It's because they were so impressive that they were able to do the things that they did. And no, that's not it. Elijah and others who prophesied were men just like mankind today. And the difference was that they served an extraordinary God, and God's purpose for them was to do extraordinary things. Now, that's not God's purpose for everybody. Sometimes we think, well, I'd like to be just like Daniel. Probably can't be just like Daniel, because you have to have God's sovereign calling to do that, to be just like Daniel. You can have the courage of a Daniel. You can speak clearly like a Daniel. You can pray boldly like a Daniel, but you can't be just like a Daniel unless that's what God's calling you to do. He was a man of the same nature, ordinary like we are. And he had a sin nature like we have a sin nature. All mankind, for all have sinned. Elijah and others like him were men, not angels. Just ordinary men. They made mistakes. They did wrong. They got discouraged. They failed at times. I'm feeling better with each step. Yeah, I do the same things, and you probably do too. So thinking about Elijah should encourage us. He was just like us. That's the point from James. Secondly, he impresses us because he lived in evil times. He lived in the territory of the northern 10 tribes. Now you remember that it was a united kingdom under the judges. It wasn't a kingdom yet, but they were a united people. It was a united kingdom under Saul, under David, and under Solomon. But after Solomon, God said he would take it away, part of the tribes, away from the descendants of David because of the sin. And so he took 10 parts and gave them to Jeroboam. And that was the northern kingdom. And we're in the southern kingdom, as you read through the account of all the kings in the southern kingdom during its entire history, you'll read some accounts of some righteous men. Hezekiah, for example. Others who were righteous in that line. In the northern kingdom, you will never read God saying, this was a good king. This was a righteous king. There wasn't one of them. There were the same number of kings in the north as in the south. They didn't parallel as to how long they served. Sometimes one would serve for 52 years as king, and there might be 2 or 3 in the other kingdom. But they ended up being the same account. Well, actually, the ones in the south continued for a longer period of time, but there were the same number of them as served during the shorter period of time before the northern kingdom went into captivity to Assyria. But the same number of kings in the north as in the south. He lived in the days, Elijah lived in the days of the 7th king. Now, Jeroboam had been the first, and he was apparently afraid that they would go back to for loyalty to the south if they went back to the temple in Jerusalem to worship. So what did Jeroboam do to take care of that problem? He built his own worship centers, one in the north of the country and one in the south, and he said, look, too hard for you to go to Jerusalem, just go to these. Now the one in the south wasn't that far from Jerusalem. Could have pretty much gone the rest of the way, but he talked them into the idea that this would be better. So he was the beginning of this line of 7 kings leading up to Ahab. Ahab the 7th was the worst of the lot. Not one of the first 6, as bad as they were, had been as bad as Ahab was. And it was during Ahab's reign that Elijah served. He served in evil times. And as if that wasn't bad enough, he had a wife that made things worse yet. Her name was Jezebel. That's right. 1 Kings chapter 16, verse 31. It came about as though it had been a trivial thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, that he married Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians, and went to serve Baal and worshiped him. So Ahab was just full out in worship of the false gods. We remember they're nothing. They're imaginations. They're figments. We've got a lot of figments in religion today, haven't we? And they had a lot at that time, and they were worshiping those figments of their imagination. Those who worshiped the true God, who believed in Jehovah God, what did they tend to do? They tended to move away. It was becoming so bad in the northern kingdom that even though they owned land, and their territory, which had been assigned to them by the direction of God under Joshua, Moses and Joshua, their territory was up north, but they left their land and they moved down to the south so they could be where the temple was and so that they could worship God. It cost them something to make that move. And what did it do to the kingdom in the north when they moved away? It got proportionately worse as the godly people moved away. Jezebel supported the prophets of Baal. She not only thought they were good, but she used her riches to finance them so that they would be in good condition. There were, 7,000 who had not bowed the knee to Baal. Still in the northern kingdom, there were 7,000. That's not very many. Apparently, that's the accurate count because God said that he had 7,000 who had not bowed the knee to Baal. But you think about 10 tribes and the hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people in those tribes. 7,000 left, that was hardly the size of a dot at the end of a sentence in the population of the north. So 1 Kings 19:14, then he said, I've been very zealous for the Lord. This is Elijah, the God of hosts. For the sons of Israel have forsaken your covenant. They've torn down your altars and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they seek my life to take it away. So God says, I have 7,000 here. How many of them was Elijah seeing? Not a single one of them. He'd look around, he couldn't find anybody. He says, I'm all alone, and they're trying to kill me. Bad days when Elijah was serving. And I suggest you're thinking that Elijah's time was like our time. Now, our time is not that bad yet. But boy, there are a lot of things going wrong in our time. I suggest to you that our government is supporting the Baal of evolution. Is that a reasonable comparison? Their Baals were imaginary. They were substitutions for the real God. And evolution is imaginary. And it's a substitute for the God who created heaven and earth. Government in our time is enabling and encouraging immorality. By law, by statute. Government is inhibiting moral behavior. So if you are a baker and you don't want to bake a cake for a gay marriage, the exercise of your religious freedom is under assault by our government. You might end up with a very big lawsuit. You might lose your business because you want to be what? Moral. You'll be accused of malice, of hatred. Do you have to have malice to not want to build such a cake, to support such a wedding? I suggest to you that you do not. Now we have to be careful that we don't have malice. All of sin comes short of the glory of God, and it's easier to spot some sinners. And we have to be careful that we are not hating people that we should be loving and seeking to correct from their ways. They're in danger of hellfire. They need what we have, and if we don't give it to them, if Christians don't give it to them, then who's going to do it? There's nobody left. So it's up to us to be open to association enough to share the gospel without compromising the morality of the situation. I say government is inhibiting moral behavior. Then they had and we have pride, selfishness, greed, corruption, and lying. It seems like almost nobody can stand a test to get into government service because they're going to find out what their background is, and it looks like just about anybody that you pick is going to have some real problems in their background. And churches are conforming to the godless culture. Now, they didn't have churches in Elijah's day, but the religion, the religious leaders, the priests and the prophets were conforming to the godless society of the time. And that's what's happening in our own day. I suggest to you that we can identify with Elijah because we serve in a wicked time, not exactly the same, but similar in many respects to that time. Thirdly, we know little about his earlier life. He impresses us because he comes onto the scene just like that. In a verse that we looked at in chapter 17, that's the first we ever read of Elijah. He's Elijah the Tishbite. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And he just shows up on the scene and he says, "It's not going to rain unless I say so." No background, no introduction. It's a culture of genealogies. Old Testament's full of genealogies, records of so-and-so begat so-and-so, begat so-and-so. Nothing for background for Elijah. Samuel, do we have any record of where he came from? Well, we know about his mother, don't we? Before he was ever born, his mother was in a hard relationship because of another wife in the same household, and his mother was barren and the other wife was having children, and we know about how that came about. We know about Samuel in the temple as a young child. We've got a background for him. And the same is true of most of the writing prophets. So you can look at Daniel. There's a backstory. There's a backstory for most of these men. For Elijah, not a thing. Just bang, there he is. His announcement, the announcement he made, is so startling that you wonder, where did that come from? I mean, right out of the chute, it's there's not going to be any rain unless I say so. Where did you get that, Elijah? Now, we study it and we can learn where he got that. God had said that if such and such happened and they followed after the idols instead of worshiping God, he'd withhold the rain. And Elijah, I don't know if he just figured it out from studying the scriptures or if God revealed it to him, but Elijah knew that God was going to fulfill that judgment that he'd told him way back during the Exodus that he was going to do. So, but we don't have any support for that in the text. It doesn't say the word of the Lord came to Elijah and he said. It just says Elijah came and he said. Elijah the Tishbite. Tishbite. A Tishbite is a person from Tishbe. Where do we know Tishbe? Well, let's see if I can point out Tishbe here. It's going to take you a little while to find that. Right there, Tishbe. See that? Yeah. And you see that here's the Jordan River. And you can't see the southern part because I wanted to make this big enough. This map contains the whole country, but I wanted to make it bigger on the screen than that would be, so I only put half of it on here. But he's coming from Tishbe, And he comes across to Samaria to make his announcement. We don't have a record of him leaving Tishbe. We have the statement that he is a Tishbite when he makes this statement in Samaria. We're not dealing with this right now, but it is going back to the fact that he's going back to the ravine to be fed by the ravens, and then he's going up to Zarephath, and there he will get food from the widow of Zarephath. And then when he gets done there, he's going to come down here, and he's going to go up to Mount Carmel, and he's going to have the confrontation with the prophets of Baal and so forth. So that's the map there, but I really only put the map on there so that you could see where Tishbe is, and what little we're told about him. We know that he was a Tishbite. Now, having told you this, we really don't know for sure where Tishbe was. But that's the best guess that anybody has, and that's why they put it on the map in that place. Could have been there. Not critical to our understanding, is it, to know where it is? He was one of the settlers of Gilead. And Gilead is this whole territory here on this side. You see the label Gilead there. Whole territory on this side of the Jordan River in this area here is known as Gilead. He was of the settlers of Gilead. Those who had settled the land of Gilead. So that would be the tribe of Gad. Remember, it was Reuben and Gad and half the tribe of Manasseh that settled on that side of the river. And Reuben was farther south, and Gad was in this territory here. He was of the settlers of Gilead. At first, Joshua questioned the faithfulness of these settlers. So Joshua questioned that. They were going, you remember the circumstances? They had helped with the conquest of the land on the west side of the Jordan River, and they were going back home again, and they built a couple of altars. They built one on the west side of the Jordan River, and an identical one on the east side of the Jordan River. And Joshua came and said, "Don't rebel against the Lord in this way." And they said, "We're not rebelling against the Lord. We just want to make it clear that we're part of this country too. It's the same on both sides of the river." So Joshua had questioned. You know what happened? So Joshua thought maybe they weren't being loyal, but they were being loyal. But now we wonder if at this later date, maybe they were more righteous than the rest of the country because they had a little bit of isolation to what was going on in Samaria. So maybe the background over in Tishbe was maybe a little more, could I use the word conservative in the sense of loyal to the scriptures? Maybe it was a little bit more conservative over there at this time. His name means God is my strength. Elijah, God is my strength. And it's interesting to think about naming of people. Usually they were significant. They meant something about the life of the person. And if his parents had called him God is my strength, it's very possible that his parents were godly people who had taught him to trust in the Lord, and he's carrying on in that heritage. There's a fourth thing about Elijah. God commissioned him to do difficult things. For example, when he appeared to announce the drought to Ahab, Ahab's the king. He's powerful in those days. If the king says off with their head, that's what happened. The king says stone them, they got stoned, and so forth. He had to go and tell Ahab there wasn't going to be a rain until Elijah said so. Ahab was not going to be happy about that. He had to ask a widow to feed him before she fed her child. The widow of Zarephath. That's a hard challenge. give me dinner first. And the widow is thinking, this is the last meal. I cook this, I serve this, and there is no more. This prophet says, I'll see to it that you never lack for flour or for oil, but feed me first. Somebody calls you up and gives you a promise like that on the phone, what are you going to do? Hang up. But in this case, it was the right thing to do, but God gave him a difficult assignment. He was to challenge the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. He went over there, and I think the number was 400, wasn't it? 400 prophets of Baal? It was 400 to 1 who had the power. Elijah, the one. But still, I mean, you got a crowd of 400 and you're the only one that takes the other viewpoint? That's a challenging situation. He was charged with rebuking Ahab and Jezebel when they stole Naboth's vineyard. Rebuke the king. You did the wrong thing. That's his assignment. And Christians with Elijah's courage are in high demand. Willing to stand alone, willing to deliver God's message in the face of a lot of people who do not believe the same way. In opposition, they are in high demand. The fifth thing I see concerning the life of Elijah is that God did supernatural things for him and through him. And I suppose we think of this more than anything else. God had the ravens to feed him. God is able to control the instincts of a bird. And he caused those birds to want to come and drop off food. Now, ravens are real good at dropping food, but not as this is a miracle, right? I mean, it conforms to their nature somewhat, but picking it up and dropping it right there at that place, that's pretty special. God kept grain and oil containers filled for years, even though they were dipping out every day to prepare meals. God raised a boy from the dead. Now that was a real rarity. Someone being dead and then being raised again. God brought down fire from heaven to burn an offering on the altar, covered with water. And God brought down fire from heaven for Elijah. God had an angel feed him. You remember he was fleeing from Jezebel and he was going down south and he went to sleep and woke up and an angel had cooked dinner. That's a remarkable thing too. He predicted the recovery and death of Ahaziah. Ahaziah was trying to figure out whether he was going to die of his sickness or not. And Elijah said, yeah, you're going to recover from the sickness, but you're going to die. And that's exactly what happened. He recovered from the sickness, but his servant smothered him, and he died. And then he brought down fire. God brought down fire from heaven. Another time, the enemies that were sent from the north, the Ben-Hadad up from Syria, was attacking Israel, and his counselor said, it's Elijah. He's telling the king what you're talking about in your bedchamber. And so Ben-Hadad sent 50 soldiers to take care of Elijah. What will beat 50 soldiers? Fire from heaven will do it. And so God sent fire again. And then you know that the Jordan was parted so that Israel could come across during the campaign of Joshua to take the country. But God did it again for just Elijah. Just so Elijah could go across on dry ground. Could have built a boat, right? I mean, there are ways of getting across the river, but God, in a very special way, stopped the river so that Elijah could go across on dry ground. And then, this is a little bit unique too. God lifted him to heaven, alive, just. That's pretty spectacular. Know anybody else that happened to? Well, there was Jesus Christ, wasn't there? He was lifted. Didn't require a whirlwind for Jesus, but he was lifted into heaven. And so in 1 Kings chapters 17, 18, and 19, and 2 Kings chapters 1 and 2, we have the record of the life of Elijah. The sixth thing about Elijah that stands out is that he stood apart from the evil around him. There was all of this wickedness going on, all of this worship of false gods, and he just stood firm, faithful to the Lord. And it is in keeping with the instructions we have in the New Testament. He was obeying the principles that we find enumerated in the New Testament. For example, in Ephesians 5:11, do not participate in the unfruitful deeds of darkness, but instead even expose them. And this is another prominent place, and I've mentioned it a number of times. I think I won't read this passage again. You're familiar with it. Don't be bound together with unbelievers. And then in Hebrews chapter 13, 12 through 14, Hebrews 13:12, therefore Jesus also, that he might sanctify the people through his own blood, suffered outside the gate. So let us go to him outside the camp, bearing his reproach. For here we do not have a lasting city, but we are seeking the city which is to come. Jesus suffered outside the gate. The gate is the official government and religion of Israel. God calls on us to come outside the gate. The gate would be many popular religions that are called Christianity, and we're outside the gate. And that's exactly what Elijah was doing. In his day, the religion was Baal, and he was outside the gate as well. He understood that there could be no fellowship with unbelief. I wish all Christians understood that today. Elijah understood it. And we said there were seven things, and here's the seventh. He lived in God's presence and drew upon God's power. His basis for action was, as the Lord lives. He was calling upon God's life, upon his direction, upon his power for the things that he did. And he did what the Lord instructed him. In 1 Kings 17, verses 3 and 4, go away from here and turn eastward and hide yourself by the brook Cherith, which is east of the Jordan. It shall be that you will drink of the brook, and I have commanded the ravens to provide for you there. God instructed him, you need to run, hide. What did he do? He ran and he hid. Did exactly what God told him to do. In 1 Kings chapter 17, verses 8 and 9. Then the word of the Lord came to him, saying, arise, go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and stay there. Behold, I have commanded a widow there to provide for you. You don't know what was going on that God said, you need to go up there. You know the water was stopping on the brook. It's going dry. So he's losing his water source. But you don't know what else. Maybe he'd be found soon if he stayed there. God said, you need to go there. So he went there. He did what God instructed him to do. Chapter 18, verse 1. Now it happened after many days that the word of the Lord came to Elijah in the third year, saying, go, show yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain on the face of the earth. There again, wasn't an easy thing to do, to go and say, hi Ahab, here I am. Because Ahab's been searching all over the place for him. He did what God told him to do. Sometimes we fear to do what God tells us to do. Is it reasonable? No, it's not reasonable. Do we understand why people do it? Yeah, we do understand why people do it. We're not saying it's reasonable. We're just saying that people do it anyway, and we have to be careful that we don't become fearful to do what God has told us to do. The Lord answered Elijah's prayer. 1 Kings 17:22. The Lord heard the voice of Elijah, and the life of the child returned to him, and he revived. That was quite a prayer, wasn't it? He had the courage to pray to God and say, I want you to restore this boy to life. And God did it. And he was a man of God. The woman recognized it in 17:24. Then the woman said to Elijah, now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord in your mouth is truth. A man of God. What does it mean to be a man of God? A man who's closely connected with God, whom God uses to do his work. Still just a natural man, but a man tied to God and his power and his direction. The word of the Lord was in his mouth, and he acted boldly to kill the prophets of Baal. You know, that's a big deal too. There are 400 prophets of Baal. They're all being sponsored by the capital, by Jezebel. And Elijah has just shown them up as frauds. He's going to kill them. 1840. Then Elijah said to them, seize the prophets of Baal. Do not let one of them escape. So they seized them, and Elijah brought them down to the brook Kishon and slew them there. 400 prophets of Baal got killed that day. You think that takes nerve and courage? And yeah, that's a big deal. I don't think he'd ever killed anybody. That day he killed 400 of them. Was it a just and right thing to do? Absolutely it was. Absolutely proper to do. Would everybody have the courage to do it? No, I don't think so. So the life of Elijah, we'll look at it for a few weeks, Lord willing. And I think that the Lord will teach us some things that are practical for our own lives and help us to be better in the service of the Lord. Plan to be with us.